All right, guys, welcome back after quite a while to the Speed Up and Get Your Heads podcast. I think we're on episode 24. It's been a minute since we were able to all get together, and we talked about this actually in the last episode as well, but we've always been super busy, which is a good problem to have, traveling around, teaching, competing, working, doing all the things. And so it's been really tough to kind of align the schedules here lately, and I'm literally taking sort of time out tonight from training for nationals in 3 days to kind of make a podcast happen. So but been thank you guys, everyone who's been reaching out, asking about when we're going to get episodes going again. I appreciate all the support and the following, but we're glad to be back together tonight, and hopefully got some cool stuff to talk about. With me as always, I've got Nick from Velox Training Group and Brennan from Vortex Edge. I'm Billy from SpecTrain. We're just some guys that like to shoot, help other folks get better, teachers and trainers in the shooting space. And that's mostly what we talk about here on the podcast is just training, working, how to get better. Fellas, thanks for being making it happen finally.
Yeah,
Back
glad to be
here
back.
again tonight. 100%. Me too. And guys, so with that said, it has been a minute. What y'all been working on, man? What are you doing kind of in your personal training? What you working on these days?
And I feel like I work on a lot of like this, like similar topic that we typically usually talk about, right? Like grip
Hey.
vision, all of that stuff. Even like shooting rifles, it's pretty much the exact same thing. Grip and vision, and like that, I think that even can like be in the same exact category as like movement too. Like trying to do the grip and vision thing while you're moving, like trying to do that sort of stuff better while you're moving. Like that's what I've been working on a bunch of lately. So a lot of movement stuff,
Yeah.
but the grip and vision piece while I'm moving.
Yeah.
So
That's what separates the men from the boys, right? When you combine all the layers of difficulty together at once, and you got to do all the
absolutely,
things well together at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah, that's where it gets
absolutely.
fun, for sure.
Yeah, kind of same story for me. We were just talking about this before we started recording, but it's like I don't know, like I work on the same stuff all the time. Like I'm just trying to get better at all the things. But yeah, so I've got nationals coming up here as well. So first, oddly enough, first level 3 match. I think I've never shot an area match. So yeah, it'll be a good time. I think there's something to the tune of like 128 masterclass shooters there and like 50 some GMs. So it was pretty
That's
interesting. I was looking at like if you
yeah.
come in at the bottom of the masters versus like the top of the masters, it's like a
Mm-hmm.
difference between like 60 some percent and like 89, 90% of like finish, which is pretty wild. Just be placing with fellas in your own class. But
Yeah.
I mean, part of it, like part of it, you kind of know what to expect, right? Because you can see the stages, you can see the matchbook. Nothing looks like super crazy, or I don't look at any of it and go, oh man, like that's concerning. I don't know how to do any of that. But it's what is it, 24 stages, right? So
Yep.
just trying to put together. I think the hardest part for me right now is just stringing like I think we talked about it maybe on the last podcast, but for me, I'm trying to find that match mode where I'm really putting together at a high level, and I'm a bunch of different things, right? But I'm pushing the speed where I need to push it, and being controlled on the trigger, which is generally where I don't like to exercise any control at all. So really trying to just how do you put all that together? And so for me, it's been just kind of trying to boil it down to a couple different things, right? Number one, like apply the right confirmation level to every single target that you see, right? Don't try to set a cadence in your head. Don't think about how like you think the stage should go. Just think about what your dot needs to look like on every single target, no matter what. When I do that, and like I'm generally super successful. And then for the movement speed, right? That's the other big thing for me is if I'm shooting a bunch of small targets or difficult targets or control targets, I tend to make my movement slower as well. And so I'm trying to
Mm.
kind of just like I'm not going to get any better than I am before now, right? Like, and I've been viewing it that way for the last 2 months, right? So it's not time to develop new skill. It's just try to harness what I've got. And so for me,
Yeah.
I'm like you know what, I'm like a pretty good stand and deliver guy, right? And so I'm just going to hustle between positions, like run fast as hard as I can in between positions, post up and shoot as often as I can, right? Blending positions is something that I need to work on a lot, but it's not something that I'm just like going to try to pull out of my butt for 24 stages at my first nats, if that makes sense. So move fast and apply a confirmation level to every single target.
That's
like
super interesting because that's something that specific thing you just said. Oh, man, it's all good, but last thing especially about the we talk about it. I mean, I know we all do in classes, right? I mean, our our brains have subconscious rhythm a lot of times, and if we start doing one thing more slowly as a byproduct of being more careful, like shooting at more difficult targets, lots of things start to slow down. You see it all the time. You know, guys that have a really fast draw on a 5 yard target, if they're drawing to a 25 yard partial, all of a sudden they have a 2.5 second draw, and it's like, man, that's the draw should be exactly the same, right? But the movement is something we see, I think, in competition all the time, right? Where folks have a really, really difficult time exploding, off the trigger brake out of a position on a difficult target and actually hustling across the stage. What are you doing, Brennan, in your training? I'm curious to try to work on that specifically. How are you setting that up?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially, I'm pretty lazy. I don't like to move targets around and stuff. So I will set up a bunch of targets and a bunch of different shooting positions and or fault lines. And then I will just try to push it and shoot between 2 and 3 targets for every position, and just push movement really hard in awkward directions, right? So like, for instance, for like a right-handed shooter, right, it's pretty easy to move like straight left. I'm sorry, straight right, kind of to your strong side. It's also pretty easy to push straight forward. It's a little bit harder to launch like backwards or like backwards to your offside, right? Where you're kind of trailing the gun out kind of behind you. So I've been trying to figure out like, I don't really want to compromise positions. I want to get into that position, set up nice and wide where I can address whatever the problem is, and then just be able to leave on both like attack targets and control targets with kind of the same amount of energy. The only difference is maybe just a little bit of timing.
Yep.
But like I'm super bad about like exploding out of a control target on an exit, right? Sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes it just makes sense for the array. And so just forcing myself to like call like 2 excellent shots on that last target and then just push as hard as I physically can. And when I do that, when I'm putting in that amount of effort, I found that my times are really competitive with anybody that I'm shooting with. And all I really ended up thinking about was just, my dot and shooting alphas. And I'm happy to say, like, I've also feel like I've cleaned up how many alphas I shoot. Like, I'm generally like an alpha Charlie guy, and I'm slowly becoming like a 2 alpha guy on even just like the easy targets, especially the easy targets. Man, like you can't give up a Charlie on an easy target anymore. So
yeah. A lot of interesting stuff there, man. I love your emphasis when you just talk about the effort because that's it's weird to say, but once people grasp it, they'll realize, man, it's just like just actually trying hard, like to move as fast as you can on the stage, is not. It sounds simple or it sounds easy, but it's not when you're thinking about especially if you're thinking about a bunch of other stuff at the same time. And that's huge. A couple of things I think might be interesting for folks there. I know we've talked about this before, Brennan, but I think video is super interesting. I got a funny DM from somebody earlier this week, and they had taken a video of themselves shooting. They're like, "Hey man, I hear you talking all the time about using video of yourself shooting and how you like learn stuff from it." And I'm just like watching this video, and I'm not coming to any like magical revelations from just like watching myself shooting. Like, what do you use that for? And some of that, you're limited by using video and sometimes your understanding of what you're seeing and your understanding the technique and how to diagnose and so on and so forth. One thing I said to him is like, man, one of the biggest tools as far as using video is just to check and see if your perception of what happened was really what happened. Right. And that's where, I've heard so many times from folks that watch their match videos, they're back and they're like, man, I feel like I'm running really fast on that stage. And then I watch my video back and I just feel like I'm just crawling, like what's going on. Right. And so I think in training, especially when you're doing stage style training, that's one of the really cool things you can pay attention to in video is, man, are you actually trying to run fast, across that stage? Are you actually putting effort into those movements, especially on those control targets? And that's a good tool. The other interesting thing, I don't know if you've seen this, Brennan, but a lot of times, not only when we're shooting control targets, does our movement slow down, but when we start running faster, we start shooting faster as well, in ways that we don't even intend to, right? And so, separating that can be a good thing depending on the difficulty of the target, but separating that out in your mind can actually be really difficult. Again, the speed of different things like movement and gun handling versus the shooting that you're doing.
It's one of those things that's kind of like, patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. Like it's hard to separate like, oh, I can pull the trigger at not my full capability, speed wise. And then I can be, moving my legs as fast as they go, or vice versa, or some sort of like blend between the two. But the only times you can really just go one or the other is if you're just standing perfectly still, or, you're moving pretty fast and it's just, you're being ultra patient. Like there's so much of shooting that's just somewhere in between. You got to find that balance. Like I said, I found that if I feel myself putting in the effort, I'm generally rewarded with like a pretty darn good time. And then that allows me to just worry about, the actual, where was my dot? What did I need to see on that? And so that's what I'm just going to try to keep in mind, man. And essentially just been setting up stages and shooting them once, recording a hit factor and moving on and trying to learn from what I did and do it better next time.
There's a lot of that going around.
Oh yeah.
It's good to see.
Lots of stages on Instagram right now. It's good stuff.
Yeah. The last tip I'll throw out there, I think it's maybe interesting for folks, man. It's funny because we talk about this in shooting, but we don't talk about it in movement. Is that, I mean, your vision is still the steering wheel of your movement as well. And one of the things that I find that's super helpful for an aggressive exit is an aggressive visual transition as well. So, in my stage planning system that we go through in class, we talk about transitions, and it's transitioning the gun, but it's also transitioning sometimes not shooting just with the eye. So, as an example, off of as soon as your trigger breaks off of your last target on an array, just yanking your eyes off of that target to the spot where you want to begin your entry into the next position, and actually really intentionally driving your vision to that next spot that you're going. And man, it's really hard to do that without having an aggressive exit at the same time. It just kind of comes naturally, right? That you start getting out of there pretty quick. So that's
one of the hardest things for people to do. I think it's one of the hardest things for people to do, because I think a lot of the time people are not shooting like in the moment, meaning like they're looking at targets after they're done shooting them. As some sort of confirmation, and they're trying to be super careful. Whereas like if they would just stay in the moment, like you say, like whether it's trigger break or whether you're like, watching the dot, lift up, and you could freaking move,
I'm chuckling because you reminded me of a conversation I heard on the range at a match last week. It's so interesting listening to shooters at like different levels have conversations with each other and the things that you hear. I'm walking down onto a stage, and the last squad is leaving, and they're basically all going around making excuses for why their hits sucked on this stage, right? And the one guy goes, well, man, he's like, I'm so blind these days, I can't even see my holes on the targets. I'm just having to watch my sights and just like hope for the best. I'm like, bro, that's what you're supposed to be doing. I'm like, what are you talking about? But you're 100% right. If you're still staring at your last target while you're trying to go somewhere else, that's gonna cause you to slow down. For sure. No two ways about it. Yeah.
When I teach people like wide transitions, I tell them like let your eyes initiate the movement your body wants to do. Like that was one of the, I think, pretty valuable things I picked up from Eric Graffel, was like he kind of allows his vision to, like, he's like, yeah, if your feet move, like, that's fine. And I was big into like, oh, like, I don't really want my feet to move. Like, I want to drive it from like my knees or whatever. And he was almost kind of like his head whips around and his whole body just kind of follows and shifts. And I was like, that's honestly a really good way to look at it. Like, if you let your eyes drive something or initiate something, the rest of your body naturally wants to follow. But I had never applied that really to exits. So yeah, that's a really freaking good point.
Well, it's super important because, like, if you make it about anything else, it just goes really poorly. Like, if you make it about, like, hey, I just need to, like, snap the gun really hard. Like, dude, try that and show me what that shit looks like. Like, it's going to be freaking horrible. You know, like, you're going to have to clean up the dot, and then you're going to start watching it, and then you're going to start shooting carefully again. So it's like the eyes have to be the first thing that goes.
100%. Yep. Been doing a lot of the same thing, I think. Obviously, you know, we've talked about it before. I think, you know, for me, like you said, Brennan, when, you know, leading up to a major like nationals is not the time to try to get better at shooting. Contrary to maybe what some folks would think. This is more about, hey man, let me really solidify in my mind, I guess, first of all, what is, you know, kind of my current skill level, what are my current capabilities, and then work on that ability to just be super consistent, as consistent as you can be across a lot of stages, and avoiding mistakes. Avoiding especially big mistakes. When you make mistakes, recovering from them quickly, failing fast, if you will, and making up from that really quickly. It's really extremely difficult for me to do. I find it just enormously difficult to walk away from an imperfect course of fire, and not work to perfect that, right? Of course, that's what we do in skill development, and that's, you know, what I know how to do, and I like to think I'm pretty good at. And man, working on that execution mode, training, and just only giving yourself, you know, one opportunity to do well on a course of fire is really difficult. But it's for, you know, again, that execution mode training, I think is really cool. I saw Sean Griffith posted actually today, so you guys may have seen it as well. You know, a cool training technique that I've seen before. I've actually heard both Eric and JJ talk about this. Pretty similar stuff, but Sean was like, man, I went to the range today, and I told myself I could shoot until, you know, I shot 25 Charlies or 5 Deltas or a single mic or no shoot, right? And I got to like 250 some rounds before I shot those 25 Charlies. Yeah, it's interesting, I think, adding some weight in your training. It's difficult sometimes to to feel the weight in training of those small mistakes, especially when you're trying to go fast. But given that some kind of weight in your training, where you kind of have to pay for, if you will, those hits or whatever the case may be, is pretty interesting, and I've been doing some of that myself as well. But
I like that.
I'm also shooting a bunch of build drills. I can't lie. If you know, you know. It's gonna be a good time this year, for sure. But some of both. It's interesting. I don't know if you guys have found this, but for me, and this may just be my natural bent as a shooter, right? Some of you guys may be familiar with my kind of journey in shooting. I for years and years, kind of fell a little bit into that, you know, gunfights happen inside of 7 yards, you know, kind of mindset, and did, you know, just all up close and fast shooting for the most part in my training, and you know, built a strength in that area for sure. And then when I started getting into other stuff, kind of abandoned that to a certain extent for a long time. And I think for me, it was to my detriment. You know, folks can talk all you want about, you know, how, you know, that up close, really fast, not high accuracy standard type shooting is not applicable to some of the stuff we do, as an example, in USPSA. But for me, right, I find that at least a certain percentage of that in my training is really helpful, just with my connection to the gun, the comfortability in running the trigger, generally relaxing and not allowing tension to build while I'm shooting, you know, eliminating trigger freeze, like, you know, a certain percentage of that kind of work I find to be really helpful. and just because it requires all those things, right? It requires you to relax. It requires you to be really intimately familiar with your trigger, and it requires you to learn how to slap the trigger without moving the gun, and all the things that we actually want to be good at, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys have found the same thing, but I think even my performance at intermediates and distance work suffers if I don't continue to work the up close and fast stuff. Am I crazy,
I
or do you
agree.
found the same thing?
No, I
Yeah.
found the exact same thing. And I'll tell you, dude, like going around the country teaching and stuff, I would tell you guys this, like, you're more apt to see someone be able to hit the target than like shoot something really fast and clean up close.
100%. Yeah.
Dude, that's the hard stuff. Like,
Yep.
3 targets at say 5 yards. Like, I get it; they're not super hard to hit, but like doing that really fast, and I think another thing too that people miss with those is like when you're doing that shit in practice, like you should be very, very critical of what your groups look like, right? Like if you're using the entire alpha at 5 yards and then you're going, well, see, it's easy. Well, it's like, well, then you're kind of missing the point. And I think that if you're, not being critical of your groups, I think that is going to 100% translate to, deltas and misses at 20 and 25 yards. I'll tell you this too. I think the fast up close nasty stuff has, kind of inoculated me to how the speed feels. And so, build drills or targets at 25, like really, really don't scare me anymore. Because I'm just seeing and processing stuff a whole lot faster. So
Yeah, I love that. I think
it's important.
the value you get out of anything is obviously directly related to how hard on yourself are you being and how hard are you pushing,
Yeah.
right? If you get super happy shooting a 2-second build drill, like yeah, you're gonna run out of value, there real fast. But I mean, I'll tell you right now, this is gonna come out while we're at nationals already. So, I'm working, sub second and a quarter build drills right now. Like there's that's hard. Like it's real hard, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of stuff you have to get
Yeah.
exactly right. And so yeah, there's potential there. And I think the other thing is just having those kind of goals. It's super interesting. I think when setting tough goals for yourself as far as where you want to be forces you to learn stuff that you never would have really thought.
100%.
It's because it's easy for me. Stuff you think that you're good at. Like for me, I haven't been pushed by anybody to get faster at the draw in a really long time. Right? Like I got something I feel like a lot of times I can get super comfortable with and be like, yep, I got this pretty squared away. And then all of a sudden you start setting crazy goals for something. And it's like, man, is there still room to grow, to get even faster on this? And you start playing around with things again. And so it's pretty cool. I've been enjoying it for sure.
Dude, I think that thing about like really pushing yourself up close. You mentioned like fighting tension and fighting trigger freeze and like pushing how fast you're processing things. Like I think there's a lot to that. Like one of the something I've been playing around with lately is like a build drill, reload build drill, right? It's got to be clean. It's got to be sub 4 seconds, right? Which isn't terribly hard if you have decent draw and a decent reload and can, in general, shoot a sub 2 bill on demand. But stringing together 12 rounds like that was way more difficult than I thought it would be than just shooting 6 or just like shooting 2 at a target. Like I will not generally have much of a problem with tension shooting something like El Prez or something like that, right? Generally stay pretty loose, pretty fluid, pretty good hits. I feel pretty good about it. But then you go to really kind of crank down on that speed and do like a 1-3-1-4 build drill on a target, and then you've got to do it again. It's like, whoa, like there's so much to discover there. And I feel like the time that I've put in working on that exact thing, like 3 or 4 targets next to each other with varying levels of throttle control necessary, like is not that big of a deal, like it's really easy to stay loose and relaxed and in control for all of that. So that's where I think some of those like Instagram drills, I'll call them, like pretty freaking valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that inoculation is interesting. It's like, man, one of the things I found is like, hey, you want to get really good at like a 7-yard build drill, back up to 10 with the same time standard, and try to get good at that, right? And then go back to 7, and you're like, oh man, I can really go fast now at 7, right? And so yeah, kind of pushing those envelopes and the different thresholds it's interesting how it can impact you in other ways for sure.
Wait, it's like forcing the precision piece of it, right? Like,
yeah.
It would be like if a race car driver went fast but didn't know how to be precise. Like, that guy's probably not going to win, and he's probably going to wreck, right?
Yeah,
like
he's going to die. Yeah.
Like the precision piece has to be there. So I like that.
Yep.
Move back to 10. I dig it.
Yeah. Yeah, but we hear that about speed, a lot. The old drive 200 miles an hour in a car and then go drive 60 and it feels like you're standing still, right? Which is true with speed, obviously, but I think it's with applies to distance as well. Again, if you still hold yourself to the same time standards, if you move back to distance and allow yourself to go slow, then the value isn't necessarily there. But anyway, I digress. Good stuff, fellas. Hopefully that's helpful to folks. What everybody's been working on. We don't have a huge flagship topic for this episode. Wanted to talk about what we've been up to, update the folks. We've also got a few small topics to hit. Nick, I think you had a great one, man, for folks taking classes and just for training in general. What you got?
Yeah, so when people are taking a class and they're working on one specific thing, whatever that is, whether it's grip, vision, movement, or whatever, and then 10 minutes in, they look at the instructor and go, I don't think this is working for me. So let you guys say what you have to say first, and I'll chime in because I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So so that happens a lot to me. I will say, generally because I think for one the average skill level of the students signing up for like a Vortex Edge class is, I would say, more towards the beginner side than like the advanced side, right? And so some of the stuff that I will start talking about is stuff that is like really like mind blowing, right? And to me, it's like, I don't know, like I learned that a long time ago, right? But yeah, so I've heard that a lot. The way I try to structure it in class is like, look, gonna throw a lot of stuff at you, right? It would be awesome if you would try this stuff, like, because I think it's valuable. Like, that's why we have it in the curriculum. I found it to be super helpful, but I like straight up tell people at the beginning of class, like, some of this stuff takes like, not some of it, like pretty much all of it takes a lot of work to get dialed in. And there will probably reach a point. So let's say like grip, for instance, if I've got some different way for you to grip a pistol that maybe you don't, you're not a big fan of or something, and you're trying that. Well, like 3/4 of the way through the day, when we're working on movement and other stuff, like I probably expect your grip to go back to the way you've done it for the last 5 years. Like, I don't really expect it to be this new, like, oh yeah, like I'm going to nail this new like Brennan grip or whatever. Like, no, like I don't really expect that. What I do want though is while we're in the moment and like practicing that or trying to figure that out, for you to just play around and just explore some with what, different grip pressures on the gun do to the dot or whatever, right, under recoil. But that is 100% something that I like tell people even before the class starts, that you're going to have to take this stuff and go home and practice with it. And at the end of class, like if you're not planning on doing that, then like I hope you had a great day at the range, right? But if you are planning to do that, like I think there will be a lot of valuable like nuggets in there for you to just kind of unpack. But it's going to take a bunch of work to get there.
Yeah, good stuff. It's interesting. I'm not going to add a whole lot, but it's tough because one of the things that I've learned with I say this at the beginning of most of my classes these days, man. One of the things I've learned from spending a lot of time on the range now with 3 world champions and a bunch of other high level dudes is that I think if you get the top 10 pistol shooters in the world together and ask them how to grip a pistol, the only thing they're all going to agree on is that the 11th guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And there's a little bit of exaggeration there. There's going to be some universally agreed on principles, but they are all going to tell you something a little bit different. And in some cases, they're going to tell you stuff that's exactly opposite, right? And so why is that? There's a lot of reasons. In some cases, what we're arguing about doesn't matter. Um, in some cases, there's more than one way to get to the same spot, but in a lot of cases, there's a lot of variables to consider. So, what I prefer to do a lot of times, I think in classes, instead of especially some of the mechanical stuff, like instead of telling people like, hey, here's how you should grip the pistol, and here's exactly where your thumb should go, and here's exactly the kind of pressure your thumb should be putting or not putting into the gun, right? I prefer to say, hey, here's how the gun should behave. And here are some drills that we can do to analyze how the gun behaves, and I'm going to help you figure out how to get it to behave that way. And it helps folks, I think, sometimes have an open mind and actually explore, because when they do it their way to start with, the gun isn't behaving correctly. and in the words of my friends, friend Scott Jelinski, man, if you got a way that works for you, but you still suck, it doesn't work for you, right? And so what it does to the gun is like all I really care about. But of course, what you were saying, Brennan, is 100% correct. It is difficult, especially in an advanced level class where you're quickly going through a lot of in-depth techniques and higher level stuff, and someone just had to like rebuild their grip from scratch at the beginning of class. Like, man, keeping up with everything else is really tough. And one of the biggest things, especially with grip, that I tell guys is like, man, just go ahead and add, like, I don't care if we're shooting a stage. Go ahead and add a second to the beginning of your stage time and make sure your grip is right. Like, you're probably not going to get it exactly right out of the holster. Like, especially in a class where we didn't spend 2 hours working on grip, on the draw, right? But, man, make sure that stuff is right before you do anything else. Because if it's not, then anything else we're working on is not going to go well, And so... yeah, it's tough. Some folks are coming to class and aren't super open minded, as well, and just aren't willing to look at new stuff, and that's okay. If you want to go home the same way that you came in, the same shooter that you came in, then I hope you have fun. Like you said, Brennan, go forth and continue to do what you're doing and have the same results. It is what it is.
Yeah. So I started telling people, basically at the very beginning of each class, like, hey, this is the class that I personally would want to go take, and which means this is going to be homework. What I would work on, on my range day is what I'm about to show you guys for the next 2 days. And I think it's really important to understand that, like, if you've only been doing this one thing for 10, 15 minutes, you don't know if it works for you or not yet.
Yeah.
You really don't. Like, it might not be going well at the time. And to be honest, I would kind of expect it not to go well, especially if it's new to you. So I don't know. I feel like people should be more aware of, like, taking classes should be homework for you. And it should be homework for like the next 6 months to a year, hopefully. Right.
It's a good class.
So,
100%.
Yeah. And so I would just be more open-minded to that type of stuff. Like, just because you don't get it within the first 10 minutes doesn't mean that it's not going to work out for you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think folks, and just one last thing, I'll add to that is, folks need to be really careful with how they define not working, right? So, as an example, if you're saying it's not working because it's not comfortable, so what? I don't care. That's not the goal. The whole idea was not for this thing to be comfortable. Again, especially if you're putting, your wrist in a position it's never been in before, or squeezing, your super aggressive grip panels harder than you've ever squeezed them before. Like, yeah, guess what? It may not be comfortable, but again, don't care. What's the gun doing? So I think how we define not working is also super important.
Here's a great example before we move on to the next topic. I had someone tell me, we were going over the visual stuff, right? She was like, well, when I target focus, I see 2 targets. And I'm like, you what? And she repeated it. I see 2 targets. And I'm like, okay, holster the gun. And she holstered the gun. And I was like, look at the target. And she looked at it. And I'm like, how many do you see? And she's like, 1. And I'm like, okay, so when you put the gun in front of your face, now you see 2. So what are you looking at? And she's like, oh, I think I'm doing what you're telling me to do. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like this is
Yeah.
going to need time to set in, and this is going to
Yeah.
take some practice on your part. But
Yeah, that's always tough, man. A lot of times we were just talking about with video. A lot of times our perception of what's happening is not actually what's happening.
Mhm.
Right, and that's especially difficult with new concepts or concepts that you may not fully understand because
Yes.
you're interpreting that, right? And that's again why I always kind of fall back to what is the gun doing, because trying to we can talk until we're blue in the face about how hard to squeeze the gun, but there's no exact formula of words that you can give somebody that's gonna let them know exactly what to feel in their hands.
Nope.
Like there just isn't, right? And so it's got to come back to, for everybody, experimentation, understanding, how do I want the gun to behave? How can I analyze whether or not it's behaving correctly, and experimenting until you get it to behave the way that you want, or as close as you can,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Principle-based training rather than just do this.
Yeah.
100%.
We've all been to those classes.
Yeah. it's. I mean, it's. I've been trying to. I've been thinking about saying this the whole time. I've been trying not to, but I mean, I was literally in a Facebook group. I'm embarrassed to even say it, but like earlier this week, right? And it's an alumni group from another instructor that I have a lot of respect for, but teaches a very specific way to grip the gun, right? And a dude's in there posting a picture of a pretty high level grandmaster and the way that he grips the gun, and it almost sometimes the idea behind it is like, man, how does this guy not know how to properly grip a pistol? Because he's doing it differently than we do it. It's like, it just blows your mind sometimes. But yeah, you're 100% right. That sometimes that style of teaching, that's what you end up with, and it's really, I think it can really be harmful to folks.
Yep.
If all you're doing in your training is trying to figure out how to do it the way that you were taught, again, instead of trying to get the gun to behave the way that you want it to. So
Just as a secondary note on that too, like if you're the instructor who is just teaching like the one way, like you probably need to get out and see what other instructors are teaching, and like go train with dudes who are training with other dudes and stuff like that, right? Like go take classes with the guys who are training with top level shooters, go train with the top level shooter guys, like get into those classes that are hard to get into, like whatever, man. Like maybe you have to book it like 18 months out. That's fine. But like get yourself into that class and see what is being taught, and like broaden your horizons a little bit, so that you're not the guy who's just like living in his own bubble going, well, this works really awesome for me. And then you wake up one day and realize that everybody's better than you.
Or
yeah,
I'll get a little spicy, or that guy could actually go out and train and try to get better himself. Because if he's stuck doing the same exact thing all the time, then he probably sucks.
No, because you don't make any money getting better. So
even if you don't suck, right? I'll be the first to admit it's been humbling to me in the last year or two, right? To walk into a class or a room with a shooter who's like measurably significantly better than you are, and to hear that guy vehemently disagree with something you've been teaching as if it were gospel. Right? Like that's a humbling experience sometimes, and I'm sure it's going to keep happening, right? We're not, again, there's a lot of different takes out there on different things, and there's a lot of variables to consider, and we're not, no matter how good you get, no one's right about everything, I don't think. And so yeah, I think being open to that and finding folks that you respect or are better than you and have different opinions than you, I think, especially as an instructor, is obviously enormously beneficial. But even as a shooter, I think can be really beneficial to help you explore other things. Anyway, I've been probably over the last 6 months doing a lot of exploration in my training with different strategies. And by strategies, I mean taking different stages, different courses of fire, and approaching them different ways. Obviously, I think when we think about execution mode, what we traditionally think about is like, hey man, I'm not shooting obviously 100% of my capabilities. I'm picking a kind of a mode of shooting where I'm at, that 80, 85, 90% range where I can really, really execute on demand super consistently. I obviously want the best scores that I can get, but I'm not really pushing, and I'm not also being too conservative. I think it's interesting because there are situations when, possibly shooting conservative is called for, or I think it's pretty much universally agreed on. There's obviously situations where pushing is called for as well. Maybe you've worked yourself into a hole in a match, and you've got to make up some ground. You're going into your last stage, and there's live scoring, and you know exactly what you need to do in that stage, and it's outside of your comfort level. If you want to win that match, some folks would say, "Hey, man, like the pushing is completely useless. Don't do it." But I think at the top, folks are absolutely looking at that. So here's my take on it, and this is what I hopefully will be helpful to folks, right? I think sometimes when folks think about pushing on a stage or trying to be more aggressive on a stage, their interpretation of that is just generally, hey man, I'm going to try to do everything faster on this stage. And that's, in my opinion, not what it is at all. Right? Obviously, everything except pulling the trigger, you should have been doing at 100% speed to begin with. So when some folks say, "Hey man, I really need to push on this stage, so I'm going to think about making my movement more aggressive," I'm like, why wasn't it aggressive to begin with? that's question number one, right? So it's not that, but it's also not, generally speaking, shooting faster on every single target, right? So if you're approaching a stage, again, speaking about this in terms of competition correctly, you should be asking yourself on every target, hey man, what's my minimum required sight confirmation and trigger press on this target required to get alphas. And so you should be shooting your minimum confirmation that you think is required to guarantee alphas on all those targets anyway. So if you just across the entire stage say, hey, I'm gonna use less confirmation than that on all these targets, probably not going to go well. What I find works best for me is looking for a couple specific opportunities to be more aggressive than you might be otherwise, where there's hopefully not a ton of risk, but there is opportunity to gain time in specific spots. So at specific examples, right? Picking a specific target to shoot on the move on that maybe you wouldn't otherwise. Whatever the edge of your comfort zone is. If you're start getting uncomfortable shooting on the move on an open target at about 15 yards, right? Because you start throwing Charlies. Maybe you're gonna pick that target as an opportunity to be more aggressive and actually shoot on the move there. And you realize, hey, based upon the math here, yeah, maybe I risk a Charlie. But I also have the opportunity to pick up a large amount of time there. That I think that's a big example. It's shooting into and out of positions on targets that are towards the edge of your comfort zone. Picking a target again where you may be risking. Again, the risk there might be a Charlie, right? It's not like I'm not gonna pick. If you pick up the pace across the stage as a whole, now you're risking mics and no shoots. Right, but if you pick opportunities where you're willing to risk a Charlie or two in order to pick up time, then you have an opportunity to potentially be more aggressive and actually get a better result on the stage. So the movements, again, shooting on the move, entries and exits are big ones for me. Obviously, there's some opportunity there, as far as timing with movers and things like that as well. But you got to be real careful there. But yeah, for me, picking those specific opportunities where there's some room to push instead of pushing across the stage as a whole is what I've found to work the best for me. What did that make sense to you guys? What have you guys found?
Yeah, no, I like that. Trying to find opportunities. where you can steal time, specific targets. I believe it was JJ who talks about that too. But he put it in terms of like blending different positions together, but using targets to do so. I think that's kind of like what you're saying, right? Or similar to what you're saying.
Kind of. Yeah, similar, right? So what it is, though. I mean, obviously, shooting on the move, blending. That's always a good idea, right?
Yep.
But for shooters, we always have to make that kind of gut check of, okay, well, how far away am I going as a target going to be before I stop shooting it on the move? And so when you're looking for opportunities to push on a stage, maybe outside your comfort zone a little bit, I just think, trying to pick those specific opportunities to do it where you have, fairly low risk, right? So like on open targets at distance, as an example, I would consider a low risk push because you're risking, maybe a few less points if you don't do super well on that target, but you're not risking like a no shoot, as an example. But by moving on it, you have at least a chance to win back time you wouldn't normally have, or some of your competition might not have taken, by taking a little bit more risk on that kind of a target. So
I think it's important to have a pretty good grasp of like hit factor and hit factor math, to be able to make those calls. I think if you have not played around with that yet, or barely, like maybe you're just familiar with scoring drills using hit factor and you're not really sure about like calculating what kind of hit factor you need and what kind of hits and time. I think that is much more confusing to know where you should be doing that. But when you do know that, like, it definitely opens up some opportunities. I did that today, shoot with some of the other instructors at Edge today. And like one of the guys, like one of his strengths is like he generally shoots like pretty freaking accurately, right? And it was a stage where I didn't feel like I was going to make up a lot of time on him just by like how fast I pulled the trigger, because all of the targets were like either were pretty much, they were all partials, right, at like 12 yards. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to really pull the trigger any faster than him, so I'm not going to really gain any time there. But I think I could push on this, like on the biggest partial there was, and get a little bit of time on him, like on that middle position, like both entering and exiting. And so like, yeah, like I picked up like a half a second or 3/4 of a second on that. And like, I didn't double alpha it, but I came away with like a better hit factor. So I think knowing that, for sure can be a good thing, but I do think you've got to be familiar with doing some of that hit factor math.
For sure. For folks who may not be super aware of what Brennan's talking about, we actually talked about it a lot on our Eric Raffel AR episode. I know it's something we've both been probably playing with a lot over the last year. And we talked about some of those rules that I think we took away, and I don't even really think of them as rules, but suggestions, for like, how many Charlies can you afford on a stage. And I think it's really difficult for some folks to kind of figure that out from a perspective of, hey man, if I know I can afford 10% Charlies on this stage, or I know I can afford 5% Charlies on this stage, how do you just approach a stage and on demand shoot 5% or 10% versus 10% Charlies, right? And it's by not changing your perception across the stage as a whole. Or again, I think that this is important so you have, first of all, you have to be able to shoot all alphas to start with. Right? And then you start with that as your baseline. Okay, if I was going to shoot this stage with all alphas, here's how I would shoot it. I can now afford 5 Charlies on this stage. Where are my biggest opportunities to exchange time at potentially the risk of some of those Charlies, i.e., a leaning exit on an intermediate target. Okay, I'm risking an alpha Charlie there, right? So pick those spots where you're willing to risk the Charlies you can afford at the greatest exchange of time, and that's how I've started looking at it. And
it's also not the same for people who, like, if you go to a match and let's say consistently place near the bottom, but you shoot super clean and you shoot really slow and shoot lots of alphas, like that's also not for you. Like the thing is, like at that point, you've also got to, like, you probably need to do a lot of work in kind of that speed mode, development mode, to figure out how to produce times that are going to put you in the top quarter of shooters before this really starts making like a lot of sense for you to be doing. But I just thought I'd throw that out there just in case people
100%.
are like, oh, well, I was told to only allow 2 Charlies on the stage ever.
Yes. Yes.
So
very good. Good. That may be a little bit of a higher level topic, but hopefully it's helpful for some folks. Last thing I wanted to bring up, just because I have been getting a ton of questions about it, and I've wanted to do it in a little bit longer format, and I'm interested to get your guys' take as well, right? So some updates. This is going to be specifically for, again, the competition guys that are interested in USPSA and some other sports that are out there. I'm getting all kind of questions. Two, it includes things, as far as going like, hey man, with all the things that are going on, in USPSA, why are you still giving your money to the sport and like attending nationals and stuff like that instead of shooting PCSL and other stuff? For those that don't know, there's a lot of various drama, like there are in a lot of small nonprofit organizations that have boards of, and so there's a lot of debate on kind of where we stand. And what the best way to move forward. And part of that is the fact that we do have kind of a new, if you will, organization in competitive shooting called PCSL, headed up by Max Theograndis, who's obviously a multiple-time national champion in USPSA. And he's got a pretty interesting new sport he's trying to put together called PCSL. And so folks have been asking me, hey, why are you not pushing that or shooting that? And I thought I would talk about that really quickly. I got nothing against PCSL. I'm actually pretty excited about it. I think there's a lot of cool things that are going on over there. I also see some big holes in it that stop me from being as interested in it as I might otherwise be. If you think about what makes USPSA cool as opposed to some random outlaw match or just going and shooting against your buddies, to me, the biggest thing there is a high level of competition, right? USPSA creates a high level of, I don't know what that noise is, but it's kind of driving me crazy.
Brennan's on the Bill Drill Nationals over here.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Got to multitask, man. Been sitting still too long.
Because USPSA is a part of, essentially the world championships of shooting, and some of the biggest, baddest competitive shooters in the world are a part of this sport. It encourages a super high level of competition. So like around here, as an example, you go to a match, it's super hard to go to a match, not have, masters and grandmaster shooters in your division that you're shooting against. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest benefits for me in competitive shooting is going against some of the best of the best. And again, they're there because they're training for area matches and nationals and world shoot and those kind of things that, frankly, PCSL doesn't have. The other interesting thing to me, and there's some debate here in the value that I see in an organization like USPSA, actually is the classification system. Because even if you don't have, those super high level shooters at your match that you're going to, with the classification system, you have at least one chance per match to see how you stack up against, folks from all over the country. And you can see linear progression in how you progress from match to match in that classification system, right? And so, obviously, when you show up to an outlaw match, PCSL match, etc., you're just not going to have that. And so you're basically, it very much is, and again, PCSL might start attracting, super high level shooters all across the country. I'm just not really seeing it right now. And so unless you know who the people are that are at your match and you have some way to measure how good they are, it's not super unlike just like showing up at the range with your buds and shooting some stages, which has value too. But it doesn't have some of the value there that I see specifically from USPSA. I also have a little bit of a beef, and I'm super interested to get your guys' take on this. I don't know if you're even familiar with this, with the targets. Have you guys seen the PCSL targets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For folks who are actually watching, I'll throw them up on the screen real quick. So it's essentially, for folks that are listening, if you took an IPSC target and you cut it across at the top of the shoulders and you stuck a USPSA head box on there, that's kind of the perimeter outline. And then you've got this big giant K-zone thing in the head box, which is essentially like instead of having, if you took the top of the USPSA credit card, that 4-inch by 1-inch tall slice on the target, and you kept it where it was but made it 5 inches tall so that it came all the way down to the bottom of the neck, that's what you've got with these targets. Target design is super interesting. To me, I'm a big fan of targets that encourage us to create good systems of aiming and shooting in general, right? So bullseyes, as an example, do a good job of doing this. I think as we pick up speed, our shots should expand concentrically around the spot that we're aiming, and so bullseyes are fairly good for that. However, they tend to not have good graduations in them. Most of the ones that we have, like B8s as an example, just have super tiny, small graduations where you're not really building a good system of shooting that balances speed and accuracy. You're essentially trying to get all of them in that 10 ring all the time. And if you happen to throw one out in the 8, you're kind of mad about it. Is kind of the way those work. I think the USPSA targets do a really good job in the AFSIC targets of allowing you to balance speed and accuracy in a way that's pretty cool. There's some debate about the shape of the scoring zones and so forth. I think if you aren't going to make them a scoring zone square or round, making them more forgiving in the vertical plane makes a lot of sense versus the horizontal. You don't want a whole lot of horizontal movement, obviously, in your gun while you're shooting, but there is going to be vertical movement. And so some of that kind of makes sense. Some of it's probably based around the way iron sights are designed as well, and possibly around the actual and basic anatomy of targets. But point being, I like them designed around aiming schemes. Actual anatomy targets as an example. I was kind of forced to use anatomy targets back in the day, and it's like, as an example, if you have a target on it that has kind of a central aiming point, but then like you get, you get a better score if you hit the heart in this anatomy target. And of course, on humans, the heart is generally justified more to the right side of the body. Okay, so what aiming scheme does that help you develop as a shooter? Do we want folks looking center mass and then intentionally shooting to the right all the time? What about if they're shooting from the back or the side or something? Right? And so it doesn't, like what we want folks to do is to pick a spot, learn to just pick a spot on the target and put a lot of rounds there really quick. Like that's really as simple as it is. And then you can apply that to whatever target you're picking as is appropriate. So anyway, on these targets, they're scored the same as USPSA because they have this giant K zone in the head box that actually scores 10 points, and then the Alpha is still 5, Charlie is still 3, Delta is still 1. And you can only score a max of 10 points on target. So essentially, one K-zone hit is the same as 2 in the Alpha. 3-gun has done this before. This is basically borrowed straight from 3-gun, where you can put 2 in the Alpha. 1 in the Alpha, or 2 anywhere to neutralize the target. But in this case, this K-zone is like just smack dab right against the top of this Alpha. So we already see, what's funny, we talked about this at the Bill Drill competition last year at Nationals, folks essentially missing the target on occasion and tagging the credit card on a USPSA target and getting what's generally referred to as getting an Alpha the hard way. And that's really an unfortunate thing about the USPSA target, honestly, is that folks accidentally get Alphas. I don't see how this doesn't make that problem just exponentially worse. To be totally honest, like people are now accidentally getting 2 Alphas by tagging the top of that A zone. So anyway, I don't understand this target at all. I don't understand what aiming schemes it helps us develop as shooters, and so it doesn't make sense to me. And maybe someone can explain to me why this is a good idea. But I don't love the targets. Am I completely out to lunch, or what do you guys think about these?
No, I think you're spot on with it. If the top A zone is up against the bottom A zone, or they call it a K zone, right? For the head box. Yes. Yeah. Then there's just like one big ass fucking A zone. Like How far away is it from the one in the lower part?
So again, I'll throw it back up on the screen so you can see at the bottom of the K zone. Hopefully you can see. I'll actually zoom in. I think I can zoom in on this. There we go. So the bottom of the K zone is literally that goes all the way to the bottom of the head box, if you will.
That's just one big ass A zone.
People are essentially, people at any kind of distance, right? The thing is, if you aim for the center of the K zone, you've got mic potential left and right, obviously. So, I assume at distance, people are probably going to aim more for the central A. But again, as your group expands, you're going to constantly be accidentally tagging the K zone towards the top and getting extra points that you did not get that you did not try to get on purpose.
I'll tell you what I do like about it is the bottom edges are cut off. I don't want hits down there anyway. That's cool. I do.
You mean like the bottom left and right corners?
Yeah.
It digs in the corners. Yes.
Yep. I like that.
That's a cool thing of the IPSC style targets as well. But yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, that A zone, right, is smaller, much smaller than. Well, I don't know if it's much smaller.
It's exactly the same width.
Because it's A zone around the K zone, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's weird to me. Because at least with a USPSA target, I don't like how there's two A zones either. I understand why they're there, but at least if you miss the A zone in the head, you hit a Charlie. And if you miss the A zone in the body, you hit a Charlie. With this one, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're trying to just get people to just shoot one shot per target. I don't know.
Oh, it's A zone around the head?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you miss the K zone, that's all alpha.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
So that's the other, in my mind. So if you think about the design of the USPSA target, right, the reason that upper head box is there, aside from obvious applications, the cool thing for it in matches is that it allows you to give marksmanship challenges up close. Yeah. You can actually put a difficult target close to the shooter. Mm-hmm. So we have literally no way to do that, essentially, with this target.
Yeah, you could do the head box only targets or whatever, and you still have an A zone visible.
You give me that target at 10 yards, head box only. I'm still putting a 15 split on it. So yeah. Anyway,
I hope they do well though.
I do too.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, that's a couple of reasons why I just haven't been super, super excited about PCSL. And I think there's some things in the sport that kind of limit it from becoming the next USPSA as well. As an example, there's no power factor at all. So you can just load whatever ammo you want as long as your gun works for PCSL, right? So that has obvious applications that I think create, as an example, a perceived real disadvantage for folks that want to be able to buy factory ammo and compete in the sport, right? So I think there's some limiting factors to it. That leaves us with USPSA. Where are we at with USPSA? What do we need to do? I totally get folks that may be listening and saying, hey, man, I just want to go shoot. I don't want to get involved in the politics and the drama, and I don't want to hear about it. 100% get it. I'm not going to dive into a ton of it today. It's not what this podcast is about. However, a lot of times folks, I think, avoid getting involved until literally it's too late and the thing is kind of over and all the party's over, so to speak. And that potentially, I think, is where we are. At the very least, you should be concerned about the fact that the organization is losing money for no perceivable reason at an untenable rate. And if nothing else, USPSA could go bankrupt. If we keep going the way it is, we will. That's where it is, right? So at least it's definitely time, I think, to at least pay attention a little bit. There's absolutely no reason, by the way, why we can't right the ship and fix this thing. USPSA matches, for the most part, are still fantastic. They are still the best opportunity we have to test speed and accuracy in a practical shooting context at a really high level of competition. That's what USPSA is supposed to be, and that's still what it is. And so USPSA matches are still great. I still am pushing people to go participate in those matches and use them to help them get better because they still do a really good job of that. But stuff's happening behind the scenes that could absolutely, unfortunately, ruin the fun for everybody. And so we need to pay attention to those things. The reason I bring it up is because right now we do have elections going on. I was talking to the guys before we started. If you've seen the numbers, we have 35 plus thousand members in USPSA, and usually like 200 people vote for an area director, which is pretty wild. And so right now we have Area 6, Area 8, and a presidential election happening. And if 50 people that listen to this decide to go vote in their area, it could literally sway the tide. And I really do think that it's time that we need to essentially flip the board and change the way things are going. If anybody's interested, I'm voting for Ben Berry in Area 6 and Luigi for president. Find somebody that is wanting to change the direction and has clear articulable goals. If they just want to make USPSA fun or have a member code of conduct, that's probably not what we should really be concerned about right now. So there's my 2 cents. I don't know if you guys have anything to add there.
Yeah, I voted for the same dudes for the same exact reason. I think a lot of people, when they say, well, with all this bullshit going on, why are you still shooting USPSA? It's like, my answer is like, hey, man, like this is still the best thing that we currently have. I hope the PCSL thing gets better. And if it does, and all the really good shooters go there and it gets more and more organized, then yeah, sure. But like, I don't know. I feel like just quitting the sport is not going to fix anything. In fact, it'd probably empower those that are making really dumb and, well, that's an understatement, decisions. So, yeah, like I don't plan on quitting anytime soon.
Same.
I mean, for like, I think for all of us, USPSA was one of the things that kind of lit the fire under us to become like really good shooters. And I freaking have enjoyed that journey tremendously. And I think it's something that's super valuable for people of, for whatever reason you shoot, it's super valuable to just, to use as a tool to become better, whether or not you have any aspirations to win a national championship or something one day. Like that's kind of besides the point. But if you're out, involved in shooting local matches and stuff and using it as a test to figure out where you're at, like, I think it's just kind of a basics of getting better. I think it's the best competition out there right now for like a good balance of, speed accuracy, what this whole freaking podcast is about. So that's the reason I'm still involved and like still, pay an annual due and have a member number and all that stuff. And like I run a match, up here, and it's a lot of work, but like I think that's why I'm in it. And the politics is super annoying. Like I don't like to follow it and keep up with it. But I do just enough to kind of be able to essentially do my part. Pretty much how I do politics in the country as well.
Yeah, well, it's like you kind of have to be aware of like what's going on, especially if it's something that you like to go do. The country is the same exact thing, right? Like you can not pay attention and put your head in the sand, but the minute that it's on your doorstep, then it's your problem too. And I think you can definitely see something happen in USPSA where it's like, I really like this, and now I can't go do it anymore because these idiots allowed it to go bankrupt. Because they're spending, who knows where they're spending money at this point, but it's quite obvious that they're spending it on something, right? So I think it's definitely time for a change. So I wish more people would get out and vote.
Yes. Vote for all the things. Always good. Awesome. Good stuff, guys. Hopefully there was some interesting and helpful stuff for folks in that episode. Appreciate you getting our schedules together, make this happen. We'll definitely have to circle back after Nationals. I know Nick's unfortunately not going to be able to make it, but I'm sure we'll have some interesting takeaways.
Very sad. I got waitlisted and never made it.
I think I heard last week, although it was not from the most reliable source, that there was like 250 some people on the wait list,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
I think I'm like 120 down on that list, and I had people that were like, "Dude,
Rough.
you'll get in," and I'm like, "Dude, I can't I can't start I can't get excited to go train if I'm 120
Right.
down on the wait list, man." Like,
Right.
so I don't know, big time bummer for me, but
Yeah.
hopefully next
sure.
year I will get in because I really wanted to go.
Let's make it happen.
We should all squad together and then do a podcast like right after.
Like
That'd be
like
great.
in
Yeah.
person,
Yes.
bro.
That'd be so rad.
That would be awesome and weird.
It'd be so cool.
Fine by me.
Sounds like a plan. All right, fellas, that's about it, guys. Thanks for listening. If you're still here, I salute you. Thanks for listening to this the full episode. If you got questions, as always, drop them below. Things you'd like us to talk about on the podcast. There's a link below in the description where you can do that. So please feel free to do so. And also is information for all of our hosts. Make sure to check these guys out. Train with them, you get a chance. I promise you will not regret it. And until next time, this is Speed Up and Get Your Hits. Thanks, guys.